Welcoming you back to another edition of the Edge podcast. Publisher Brenden Slaughter here for BeaversEdge.com, joined by BeaversEdge recruiting analyst Dylan Callaghan-Croley. We're coming to you guys here in early January, January 10th. You're recording this on a Wednesday as we've got a whole bunch of Oregon State football recruiting and transfer news to get to. A lot of kind of setting the stage, gearing you guys back up. Dylan, it has been a crazy couple of weeks. I mean, it really feels like, in a way, we've all kind of just been like going a million miles an hour since that other coach left and went to Michigan State. We're not going to talk about him. But since then, I mean, we had a little break for Christmas, but it's been go, go, go. And you got to credit Trent Bray and his staff. We'll obviously dive into the nuts and bolts of it, but they've been doing work on the recruiting trail, Dylan. And, time will tell how good each and every guy fits and all that, ultimately comes to be. But that narrative that existed, at the end of the season, like, would Oregon State be able to get recruits with the uncertain future and the this and the that and all the excuses you heard? Trent Bray and his staff have very quietly gone to work, got some decent dudes. And, you and I had talked about it when we talked a couple weeks ago when the Oregon State landed their two quarterbacks in Giovanni McCoy and Jabari Johnson. It really seems to me like they're getting guys, we kind of called it the Moneyball class of sorts, but it seems like they're getting guys that maybe aren't the highest recruited, but have really high potential, high ceiling. Are you kind of seeing that? And what's kind of been your thoughts since we last talked, as they have really been, looking to fill out this roster in many different ways?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I think they've been doing a pretty good job considering all the circumstances in the transfer portal. A lot of these guys, are going to probably end up being more depth than anything, but you still have picked up impact guys like a Kobe Singleton out of Liberty. I mean, that's one of the top cornerbacks in all of the transfer portal this year, and the Beavers are able to land him. But yeah, I think that they've picked up quite a few high ceiling guys, though. Will they hit those high ceilings remains to be seen. But I thought they've been doing a really good job here over the last few, it's been about the last 2.5 weeks. We've seen a little bit of another surge here. We saw a surge before the holidays. It was a little quiet there around the bowl game, which was expected. And now we're seeing a little bit of a second surge here as classes begin on campus. So I mean, most of the transfer portal stuff we're going to see here this portion of the offseason is probably complete. I'm not sure when the add drop portion of the schedule for Oregon State is this week, but I'm sure it's coming up here soon. So probably seeing the last of the transfer portal guys for now, but there's going to be the spring as well, post-spring practices that they're going to add to the roster again there. And we're probably going to see some attrition down the road there as well. Because, with the new staff, 2 new coordinators, quite a bit of new people all around, there's going to be a lot of evaluations to be done here this spring, which guys are going to fit what the coaching staff wants to do, which guys are not going to fit. I think on defense, a lot of those questions are probably to a degree already known, but offensively, there's probably a little bit of more evaluation that has to be done on that side of the ball.
Yeah, for sure. And, obviously lots of exciting news for us to get to, Dylan, and some guys that came in via the portal during that stretch that you and I have covered that we really want to talk about, and we will. But like everything else, Dylan, it's like in life, right? Got to start off with the vegetables. Eat the vegetables, get the bad part out of the way. And since we last spoke, 3 more Beavers entered the portal and decided to pursue their careers elsewhere. Silas Bolden, Tanner Miller, and Sione Lolohea all entered the transfer portal after the bowl game, which, Dylan, when you and I talked, it really seemed like, if you had asked me if any one of those 3 guys would have entered after the bowl game, I would have been a little bit surprised. Tanner Miller is the only one that has since chosen, and he also is going to East Lansing. Happy trails to Mr. Miller to an extent, but Silas Bolden and Sione Lolohea are still out there. Dylan, I'm not sure if you kind of kept up at all. Silas has reported some pretty impressive offers, and I don't. This is one of those really tough things where I don't particularly love how Jonathan Smith handled his exit, but I won't blame a player for looking to get the best situation for him in a given situation. I think coaches are a little bit different, but as far as players, like, this is nothing new. And while it definitely stings losing both Anthony Gould and Silas Bolden, most of your receiver production, toss in Josiah Irish, who was a senior this year, you lose all three starters, really. That's tough to swallow. But at the same token, you know, like I said previously, you can't – I don't blame Silas with based on – I mean, Texas, I mean, Arizona, Washington, I mean, offer – I just can't blame him.
Yeah, you're going. I mean, you look at those. You look at Texas, Washington, USC first, and
USC too.
USC. Like, you look at those four programs, and they've all shown a history of production of the wide receiver program with their coaching staffs. Sorry, wide receiver position with their coaching staffs.
Sure.
USC, who knows who USC's quarterback is going to be next year? Probably Miller Moss. But at the end of the day, Lincoln Riley has had 3 Heisman Trophy winners at the quarterback position. They'll probably be just fine at quarterback. They're going to throw the ball a ton, and you can't blame him for looking there. And, Washington, we saw what they did. Yeah, they'll take a step back next year. Not that this is going to be any of Oregon State's problems anymore.
Sure.
But, they're going to take a step back next year, but that's still a huge passing offense. Texas, has Quinn Ewers returning, a bunch of other guys. And then Arizona, Jed Fisher's done a great job with that program.
He has.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that the Beavers have lost Bolden, but at the same time, I don't think you can, like I said, you can't really blame players for wanting to look out for what's best for them. And,
Sure.
if Silas had questions about what the quarterback level of play was going to be, what the offense was going to look like next season,
sure,
and he wants to get to the NFL, maybe looking elsewhere is going to be best for him. But I don't think this is one that anybody, like you said, should really have any hard feelings about. It's unfortunate, but players do have to look out for themselves, especially in a time like this where there's just so much uncertainty even after, a coaching staff comes together.
With all that, I'm curious to get your take on this. How much of Bolden's decision, Dylan, could have been because this decision did come after Jordan Anderson signed and announced that he was going to enroll early. So that's one piece of it. And then the second piece of it, we haven't heard a whole lot on Eddie Freoff, but I would say we still probably expect him at some point. Malachi Durant, again, based on everything we've seen, he's not the one of the not yet signed who I expect to leave. I think Martin Connaughton is kind of the one who's kind of up in the air, especially with the Michigan State vision that he's got. But Malachi Durant obviously knew Jabari Johnson really well. They had a relationship. How important is it for the Beavers, Dylan, to obviously have Anderson coming in, but then potentially get another guy like Durant who could also compete for playing time now that, like I said, you're bringing back Jimmy Valson and Zach Card with quality experience next year at that receiving core? It's thin. I mean, there's guys there, but guys that need to prove themselves.
Yeah. So if I'm correct, with your first thing, bringing in all this talent to the wide receiver position, I don't know if it really affected Bolden too much in his decision, just because he was going to be the leader of that room. He was going to be the guy, number 1 wide receiver for the Beavers. I don't think anybody was really going to push for that this year. But with that being said, with all the other guys, I do think the Oregon State wide receiver room is going to be in a good spot in 2024. I wouldn't be surprised if fall and spring they go out and get a wide receiver out of the transfer portal just to add to that position. They added to most of the offense this offseason. They have had on the offensive line and running back, a quarterback, obviously. So I wouldn't be shocked if they go out and add a wide receiver in the transfer portal in the second portion of that second window, just because in this first window of the transfer portal, it is so hard to really nab any sort of impact wide receiver because everybody's looking for wide receivers. Everybody always wants wide receivers. And usually the good ones are going to come with a nice asking price, and that really narrows down the list of programs that can land those guys. So I do think with Oregon State, they have a nice core there right now. You mentioned some of those guys, but I wouldn't be shocked if they go out in the transfer portal, add another wide receiver to the mix for the fall and spring practices here. But I think right now Oregon State's in good hands at that position. And it ultimately it's going to come down obviously to the quarterback spot too. Can whoever is starting quarterback make the throws that are needed? Show the consistency that's needed. Though, of course, wide receivers also are going to have to get open. But I think the guys that Oregon State has at that position have shown their abilities to consistently get open this season and before.
Of course. And then the last thing we got to hit on as well, and obviously, as we mentioned, Silas Bolden obviously entered the portal. It'll be very interesting to see where he ultimately lands. Again, some big offers. Tanner Miller, pretty safe to say, I don't think that needed to be a recruitment for how quickly he announced he was going up to that town east of Lansing. And, obviously that brings us to the most recent. Sione Loloheo, Dylan, that caught me by a bit of surprise. I understand that obviously his true position coach in Lehi Soinoa is obviously now at Michigan State, but with every kind of defensive guy, it kind of surprises me a little bit because I think there are some defensive guys who have kind of been like, yeah, I'll go for Trent Bray. And, perhaps, this is a situation where Sione Lolohea is, looking to find some financial benefits. And again, don't blame him. But like that was another, like when you strip it all away, Dylan, and you're like, yeah, Oregon State's going to bring back one defensive starter, most likely in Jaden Robinson, if Jaden Robinson comes back as we expect him to. But again, you're talking about a 6-year corner. You never know how these things work. But yeah, I mean, that's a defense that's going to look a whole lot different next year, Dylan. And, we've seen most of Oregon State's efforts. You mentioned the second late surge has been on that side of the ball.
Yeah. And I mean, you put it really well. I mean, it's going to look like a whole different defense out there next year. And there's going to be a step back. Like there's going to be a step there. It's hard to replace that many people and not take a step back.
Sure.
Do I think it's going to be a terrible defense? By no means. I still think it's going to be a good defense for the Beavers. There's still plenty of talent on that side of the ball, but they had a really nice group on that defense side of the ball last year. But when you're placing that many starters, it's going to take a step back, and that is okay. Oregon State should still be able, with their schedule next year, compete to reach that 8, 9, 10 win mark, in my opinion. But yes, on the defensive side of the ball here, we have seen Oregon State really attack that defensive side of the ball in the transfer portal over the last couple of days, weeks or so here. I mean, they landed, let me see if I can find the full list here, offseason tracker. And if you want to see everything that's gone on with the Beavers, be sure to head over to OregonState.Rivals.com, BeaversEdge.com to check out our transfer portal movement tracker, or just offseason movement tracker, I should say. Everybody who's outgoing, everybody who's incoming, we have it all there. But yeah, you look at what they've added here over the last couple days, in the last week or so. Kobe Singleton out of Liberty, Tavita Pomo, you know how to pronounce this one more than me.
Pome, yeah.
From Oregon, Sai Vadrali out of Cal, Taiji Hill out of LSU, and then they also picked up, or they saw the return.
Welcome back,
Jan Griffin on the offense side of the ball. And no, shot at Jam here, but I'm not sure if there's anything that says college football more than right now than a player going to 4 schools in 4 years. And, I mean, I guess it's 3, but Georgia Tech, Oregon State, Mississippi State. Mississippi, Oregon State.
Yeah, it's definitely like you said, it sums up the transfer portal now. And TJ Mathewson, fellow writer at Beavers Edge, also works for KJO. He texted me right when that happened, and we were talking about Jam, and I was like, just on its merits, Dylan. Like when I texted you a couple weeks ago, maybe a week and a half ago, I'm like, do you really think Jam will come back? You're like, yeah, I do. And I'm like, well, that would be quite interesting. So, I mean, let's call a spade, Dylan. He had a great backup year with Oregon State in 2022. Oregon State fans loved what he brought. He probably loved his production, all that. Again, call a spade a spade. He gets a fat bag from Ole Miss. Does not play hardly at all. So riddle me that, Mr. Kiffin. And then now he's like, well, I guess I might as well go back to where the grass was green, right? So, I mean, like you said, one of the coolest, most unique, like, explain to someone who's been, like, away for, like, a decade, this is what college football is now.
Yeah, I mean, if you went into a coma and woke up now, I mean, this is a much different sport.
Yeah.
But, I think Oregon State now has picked up 10 guys in the transfer portal. 7 of them been on the defensive side of the ball. It's absolutely been where their focus has been this offseason, and it's understandably so, because you look at the offensive side of the ball. You answered your questions at the quarterback position. You got Damian coming back, a running back. The wide receiver position should work itself out. The offensive line, we'll see how that goes. You do have to obviously replace quite a few pieces, but they've addressed part of the offensive line in the transfer portal already.
Right.
They can still do it. They have some guys coming up in the ranks on the offensive line as well. But the defense, I mean, you're replacing like a ton there. Yeah, I will say they do have a lot of pieces there that we still think are going to be really good pieces for them going forward. Isaiah Chisholm flashed quite a bit as a freshman. Nico Taylor is going to be a guy I expect to see a bigger role in 2024. You got Andre Jordan. You got Melvin Jordan. You got Tyrese Ivy.
I think Olu Amatasho too, the transfer from Wyoming, who didn't really crack the depth chart this last year. Right. He's a guy that's definitely going to be in that mix as an edge rusher with Drew Chatfield and John McCartan, obviously graduating.
Yep.
You mentioned kind of where they moved, and definitely a couple things I want to get to that you mentioned, Dylan. But some of the folks on the damn board at BeaversEdge.com have actually mentioned offensive line, and I'd be remiss if I didn't, kind of talk that through with you at this moment. Obviously, losing Tanner Miller, we talked about that. That's a loss, right? Tanner Miller was versatile. He could play 2-3 different positions on that line. He was good, all those things. And again, hence why that other guy up there wanted him. But all that aside.
And it's a bigger loss even when you consider the compound effect of the other guys you're losing on the offensive line.
Right. And again, you just figure that, what you've graduated and whatnot. The good news for Oregon State in that regard, Dylan, is, again, we talk about their first transfer in the transfer portal, Van Wells. He's a guy who will probably be competing for a starting job right away. And I could also say the same thing about Gerard Christian Lichtenhan as well. Both those guys played a ton of football at Colorado. And then you add in the fact that you're going to get a Grant Stark back from this last year. And, while it would have been much better to have 4 guys if you add Miller in that had starting experience. 3 is still better than none. And that's where I think, those 2 guys from Colorado, pretty key in this instance for Kyle DeVan and that move. And your point, do you think we could see them look at more offensive linemen post-spring, or do you think that they're pretty happy with guys like, I'll just throw out some names, guys like Flavio Gonzalez, who will be back, Dylan Lopez, Nathan Elu. We obviously saw Jacob Strand and Tyler Morano start at tackle in the bowl game. So do you think they're internally confident, or do you think that they'll kick the tires and maybe try to find one more guy with Miller gone now?
I think it depends how spring practices go. If they see enough potential there out of the guys they got in the transfer portal and what they already had in the system, I think they may be content.
Sure.
But if there's still a question mark, I think that most definitely could attack that area again in the portal. And it really, people are going to look at it at Van Wells and Christian Lichtenhan and think or Jared Christian Lichtenhan and think they're coming from Colorado, the worst offensive line in all of college football last year. Why should Oregon State expect anything there? But I mean, the problem there is that Colorado just threw the ball just so
they did. I mean, it was Dion. Let's get my son ready for the NFL. Dylan. I mean, come on, right?
I mean, Jared Christian Ligtonon recorded 581 pass blocking snaps last year, and he had his struggles at times, 6 sacks allowed. But I think, Kyle Devan is a up and comer at that offensive line position. He worked at Michigan when Michigan was, had some of the best offensive lines in all of college football. Before this year, when Washington won it, they won back-to-back Joe Moore awards for the best offensive line in college football. So I think there's plenty of promise, especially Van Wells, Christian Ligtonon. I think that's going to be kind of the X factor there.
Good point.
Can
I
he
agree.
take a step forward? Because, I mean, he did allow 39 pressures last year, according to Pro Football Focus, and 6 sacks. I don't think he's as bad as those numbers say he is, just because when you are an offensive lineman, those, next to you are going to affect your level of play. And, that entire offensive line outside of Van Wells kind of struggled when it came to pass blocking in general.
Sure.
So I think it's like a compound effect there with the struggles overall for Christian Ligtonon. But yeah, I think in the spring, depending on how everything pans out of that position, they may choose to reattack the offensive line, maybe add another piece. But for now, I think they're probably content with what they have.
Sure. We'll talk about the two defensive backs, and then obviously the two 2024 JUCO commits that we'll touch base on as well. But I want to talk about the beef on the defensive line, Dylan, most particularly Ty'G Hill, who you just wrote a story about what he's going to bring to Corvallis, and then obviously Tavita Payome, who comes from Oregon. I mean, it looks to me like Hill is more of, can be kind of either or at 6'3", 288 as far as an interior or edge guy. Payome, 318 pounds as a redshirt freshman this last year at Oregon. You combine both those guys with Ami Langi from Houston in the first round of recruiting. They got some nice beef down there on the defensive line, Dylan. And again, going back, losing Sione Lolohea, losing both edge rushers, Golden, Rawls, Hodgins, and Tavis Shippen. I mean, again, some internal depth, you can kick up the ladder, but like we said with the whole defense, a lot of work to be done there.
Yeah, and you would imagine Langi and Pome both more project to one tech type defensive tackles there, just to kind of fill in the space and stop that run game. But Ty'G Hill is somebody that I'm really just intrigued by before moving on. He is on the smaller side, 6'3", 288, but he does have a burst to his game. He does have a quickness to his game. And he didn't play a ton for LSU this past season, 73 or overall 73 snaps, but he had, I think, 3 quarterback hurries this season in like 40 snaps, which all things considered really isn't bad, because if you project that over a starter's amount of reps, he's racking up 12, 15 pressures, which for a defensive tackle would be tremendous. So I do like the beef that they've added in the middle of that line. Stopping opposing run games if you can stop an opposing run game, you make the secondary's job a lot easier, in my opinion, and I think everybody would agree. And then you can go to the secondary where they've added some high potential. We mentioned Kobe Singleton. I think that's going to be a tremendous pickup for the Beavers in the portal, because he was tremendous for Liberty. 42% completion percentage allowed this season, 4 interceptions, 12 pass deflections.
Right.
But I don't know if I answered your question directly.
No, you did for sure.
But I definitely like this beef they're adding at the defensive tackle position. But I mean, I didn't even mention a guy like Nick Norris, who
we mentioned a couple weeks ago. Sure.
Yeah, who he's a little bit on the bigger side for a defensive end, but still probably projects as an edge rusher. But could definitely be somebody that, if needed, it could probably slide in a little bit here and there to get maybe a little bit more pass rush pressure from inside if needed.
Sure. And obviously, I'm curious to get your thoughts on those two DBs. Obviously, Cy Vedrale, the third, just a freshman year at Cal. He's probably more of a build him up for a couple years piece rather than play right away. But again, I haven't seen him. Need to see him obviously in spring practice. Then Kobe Singleton. Dylan, it's kind of interesting to me because I'm curious to know who was kind of the lead guy in his recruitment, because Kobe Singleton, before he went to Southern Utah, just right up the road. Well, I shouldn't say right up the road, Pasco, Washington, but within earshot, right? Grows up here in the Pacific Northwest, goes to Southern Utah, then goes to Liberty. I'm curious, with new defensive coordinator Keith Hayward having such a defensive background, and then obviously Anthony Perkins having, a solid acumen in recruiting. I'm just kind of, and then Trent Bray perhaps too, when he was recruiting the area even. Is it a stretch, Dylan, to say that Kobe Singleton could be the most impactful guy out of this list of portal guys day one?
No, I think that's, I think it.
I mean, quarterback, maybe one of the quarterbacks, I should say that, because one will start. But
yeah, I think he's the most, I think he's the most impactful of these guys. I think this is a guy that's going to go to the NFL here in the near future as well. So I don't think that's a stretch by any imagination. I think he's I think he's by far the best portal pickup for Oregon State this season. And that's not a slight at any of the other guys, but you're talking about one of the best cornerback transfers in the country. We don't have him ranked right now in the Rivals rankings. All our national guys were at the All-Star events the last 2 weeks.
We'll have them coming up.
Yeah, we'll have them coming up. But let me see if I can go back to here. Yeah, I mean, 42% completion percentage allowed this year by Singleton. 29 receptions on 69 targets, 347 yards, only allowed 2 touchdowns, 4 interceptions, a ton of pass deflections, like we said. This is a guy, he's just a history of production at the position as well, which really stands out. He will have to improve his run defense or his support in the run, I should say.
Sure.
But I think, he's by far the best pickup for Oregon State this season. And he has shown the ability to slide into the slot if needed as well, which could be something to watch going forward if they need him to. But he'll probably most likely project to be that, that boundary cornerback for the Beavers. But I think by far he is the best pickup for them. And like I said, history of production, he has 9 interceptions over 3 collegiate seasons. He allowed he's allowed 11 touchdowns in his career. 6 were that first season with Southern Utah, and he has 5 in the last 2 seasons combined. So this is a guy who's shown consistent improvement, and I think he's gonna be in for a big season with the Beavers next year, because this is a Beavers defense and coaching staff that has now returned a chunk of that has shown the ability to develop cornerbacks and people in secondary, players in secondary in general, into legitimate NFL talents.
Right. And again, like you said, all the connections, and I'm just curious because I think just the way that he was hired the last and came from the Raiders, we haven't heard a whole bunch from Keith Hayward yet, but I sincerely believe he's one of Oregon State's best recruiters, if not maybe their best, the second he got there. So that's certainly a part of it. Dylan, real quick, going back to the defense, and one thing I wanted to mention, when you talked about having to replace all their production, if you were looking for something positive, and again, you talked about Kobe Singleton, his ability, and we'll get to the other 2 late adds to 2024 to close out the podcast. Is it the worst thing, Dylan, that you're completely resetting the table when you consider, and again, this is just one metric, but use your eyes, and at times it looked that bad out there. Dylan, Pro Football Focus had Oregon State as the worst tackling team in all of college football. 133 out of 133. And it wasn't even that close to being 132. It was historically bad. So maybe wiping the slate clean, you can try to get back to what you were the year before. It really didn't fit with what we'd seen from Trent Bray and his guys, playing under him, because they were not anywhere close to that bad of a tackling team back in 2022.
Yeah, they had more missed tackles than they had assisted tackles this year. 170 missed tackles, 165 assisted tackles this year for Oregon State. Now, if you want the good news, according to Pro Football Focus, I'm looking right now at the top missed tackles. Easton was there. Sion was up there. Ryan Cooper, Akili Arnold, Oladapo, Jaden Robinson, Calvin Hard, all finished with more than 10 missed tackles. But there is also a little bit of a trend amongst those in that a good chunk of those guys are now returning.
Yeah, they're gone. They're gone.
So they'll need the young guys to tackle better, but
yeah,
their biggest offenders in that are no longer going to be here. Which obviously
take it as you will, right?
They would like to some of these guys to return. Obviously, like Sion had 19 missed tackles.
Wow,
he missed on almost 34% of his tackles this year. Easton missed on 16% at 20 missed tackles. I mean, a guy racks up 80 tackles. He had a nice season, but if you're missing 20, I mean, how many of those 20 missed tackles eventually led to a touchdown?
Right. It's a fair point.
So while, they definitely have to improve on tackling. I think tackling's going to be the number one thing they look at this season, this offseason. I also think that, some of your biggest offenders are gone. So perhaps perhaps the young guys will be a little bit more sound tacklers.
Yes, and then obviously, with that point, Dylan, as we get ready to close out the Edge podcast, appreciate everyone tuning in for this edition as Dylan and I are breaking down the recruiting class, where it stands, pretty much bringing you all up to speed since we last spoke around the bowl game. But last couple of guys that I want to touch base on, Dylan, is obviously the two guys that joined in 2024 as a part of that late ad, and starting with Aiden Sullivan, the inside linebacker from Butte, and then from Butte College in California, and then the super tall 6'5" safety in Jaheim Patterson from Kilgore College in Texas. Just tell me a little bit about those two guys. I know they were not necessarily at the forefront, but seemed to be guys who had solid offers from other places, especially Sullivan.
Yeah. Sorry, was reading a message from a source.
No, you're good.
But Sullivan, let's start there because I did catch Sullivan, as you mentioned. I mean, Cal, San Diego State, Washington State, and Wyoming. Those are some pretty nice offers for Sullivan, and that's a guy, JUCO prospect, 82 tackles last year for Butte Community College. There, 19.5 tackles for a loss, 3.5 sacks. High history of production at Butte. Should be somebody who can step into that linebacker room for the Beavers. Projects to be an inside linebacker and be, if not a starter, be a main rotational guy there at linebacker. And I think that's a really nice pickup for them. Somebody who's going to be able to make an impact right away, provide some a veteran aspect to that room.
Sure.
And then I guess you also asked about
Jaheim Patterson. Yeah, I mean, it has to be the tallest safety I've ever seen, Dylan. If that's accurate.
6'5", 205. He says he's going to play defensive back, but hey, if that doesn't work out, he can easily move right down to linebacker. He's still be pretty tall for a linebacker, but another guy where there's been a history of production at the JUCO level, 35 tackles, 3 interceptions in his sophomore season for Kilgore. So 2 years. Same with Sullivan.
Yep.
I like both of those pickups for the Beavers. Patterson should be able to step into that safety room and provide. He looked on tape really good, so we'll see what he's able to do at the next level, but should be able to provide some good depth, if not potentially become a starter at that safety position down the road. And with Sullivan, I do wonder if they took Sullivan because of the Anthony Jones situation, decommitting from the Beavers, reopening his recruitment out of the transfer portal. So I wonder if that played a role into there. I like those two JUCO pickups for the Beavers, to say the least. Both guys should be able to come in and make an impact here in 2024.
Definitely. And again, two guys who were late ads, but as Dylan mentioned, guys, particularly Patterson Kilgore is a good community college, right? They put up some good talent. They put in good talent before. Then obviously, Butte College is famous for being where Aaron Rodgers went. So Butte College is not obviously a slouch either. So I'm excited to see those guys get in and obviously, mesh with some of the other guys, like a guy Reese Goodman, who I think is going to be a really good player for Oregon State. And, I think back as we close out the podcast again, big thanks to Dylan Callaghan-Croley for joining me, to what Trent Bray said after that first signing period when he said, we need to look at quarterback, we need to look at tight end, and we need to look at defensive back. And in my opinion, 2 of those 3 are done. I think they've done or close to done. Dylan's reported they're still in the mix for some more DBs. Make sure to check that out at Beaver's Edge. But I think now we're circling in on tight end. That's going to be a position to watch over these next, few months and even spring, post-spring, because I think that's still an area Oregon State's going to be looking to get some depth. But nevertheless, stay tuned to Dylan and I. We will continue to bring you guys the latest here at BeaversEdge.com. Dylan and I will also get back to doing podcasts a little bit more regularly now that I got through the winter blues, known as a little bit of a sickness, and working through all that this winter as well. So we'll definitely be back with you guys soon. Stay locked to BeaversEdge.com for all the latest Oregon State coverage from Dylan and myself.